This is going to be the hardest and the saddest week of most Americans' lives, quite frankly. This is going to be our Pearl Harbor moment, our 9/11 moment, only it's not going to be localized. It's going to be happening all over the country.
This is our Surgeon General, not necessarily prone to hyperbole, being very strong and making the point that this week coming up in the context of the coronavirus will be devastating. And it would only get worse, whatever these numbers are. Keep in mind, the number of test kits, the number of supplies are lacking, meaning whatever this number is, it is far higher than what they are showing. Currently, the number is over 10,000 deaths in the United States, 394,000 cases, 27,000 new cases, 12,717 deaths, 1,846 new deaths. And again, this has a lot to do with ill preparedness. So, rational actor, Governor Tony Evers of Wisconsin, we have an election today, and he decides, I am going to postpone the election. The Republican legislature is not postponing the election. I'm going to take action myself in order to postpone the election. I am trying to save lives. It is clear. I heard the Surgeon General. It is clear that this is going to be horrendous. And it's bringing a lot of people into a small space in order to cast a vote on a date that is utterly and entirely contrived, meaning it can be postponed. No, the universe will not fall apart. Our democratic order will not crumble. If it's postponed, it's probably the best thing if the objective is to preserve life, limb, and to ensure that this particular virus is not given an area in which to propagate all through Wisconsin. He comes out and says this.
Cases, we expect more deaths, we expect more tragedies. With that in mind, I cannot in good conscience allow any types of gathering that would further the spread of this disease and to put more lives at risk. I have been advised by public health experts at the Department of Health Services that despite the heroic efforts and good work of our local election officials, poll workers, and National Guard troops, there's not a sufficiently safe way to administer in-person voting tomorrow.
Now, also, it must be understood that many of the poll workers refused to go in because they didn't necessarily want to put their lives at risk for a contrived date that could be postponed. This election went forward anyway. Astonishingly, this election went forward anyway. The Republican legislature immediately filed a brief in order to block this. The Supreme Court, Republican-led, 4-2, blocks order of the governor to stop elections. This throws the state into a tailspin because many of the polling locations had to be closed, and in those polling locations being closed, it pushed everybody into certain areas. But understand what this means. Ultimately, the Supreme Court said, we will prefer the election that takes place on a contrived date to take place, allowing a large number of people to get into a small gathering, something that every health expert, infectious disease expert, scientist, epidemiologists, rational fucking human beings that understand that a lot of people in a small space during the middle of a pandemic is a recipe for disaster. The Supreme Court said, we don't care. Let's push this anyway. The Republican legislature said, we don't care. We're going to do this anyway. Joe Biden, we don't care. We're going to do this anyway. This election is obviously illegitimate. You've created a situation where the number of people that can get to that polling location will plummet. You have people who have every right to vote that can't vote because they don't want to put their lives on the line for a contrived date. The notion that the Republican legislature, that Joe Biden, that the Republican Supreme Court would allow this to take place is an outright travesty. When I take a page from the book of They Don't Give a Shit About You, start here. In fact, don't even start here. Just add this page into the book. They are literally putting people's lives on the line For Joe Biden, he wants it because he wants to win, and he wants to get this wrapped up as soon as possible because he knows he's a sundowning, nearly senile man, and he doesn't want to put his foot in his mouth and collapse in the last few states because he knows it is possible for that to take place. But the Republicans, that's different. They have an entirely different reason for wanting this particular election to take place. I want to talk about all of it. Welcome to the Soapbox. My name is Jamarl Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, if you dig this content, please like, share, subscribe, and you can always support this content through PayPal, Patreon, or, of course, Super Chats. I am enraged. People say that, well, I often say pot helps me hit my heart center. And maybe in this very specific case, it ends up in the vein of rage. And I wonder, where's the public's rage? Why is the public not angry about this? Does the public not understand what is taking place? For entirely political reasons. Again, the date of this election is utterly and entirely contrived. There is no act of God. There is no king. There is no nothing to mandate that this needs to take place on this particular day or the entire democratic edifice falls off its axis. Nothing at all. And for political reasons, the Republican Supreme Court and the Republican legislature said, nope, this election must take place today. Why? Because all political reasons. They advance their particular political agenda in this particular political race if this election is held today because they believe they can get their guy over the finish line. That's the exact reason that Joe Biden is willing to have this race today also, because he wants to drag his decrepit ass over the finish line. Public be damned. This is my point when I'm saying, where's your rage? They are doing this entirely for their own political aspirations, political expedience. Public be damned in the middle of a pandemic. Even with people dying in mass, they are still willing, Joe Biden and the Republican legislature and the Republican Supreme Court, to put all these people's lives on the line. Not just put people's lives on the line, knowingly go with an illegitimate process with a suppression of the vote that is built into this particular process because of a pandemic. And they're still willing to go along with it because it fixes their political aspirations. Joe Biden yesterday was comparing the coronavirus to a bad flu.
But these things are called, there's a virus. And a virus is what we're dealing with now. It's a particularly lousy kind of virus. It's like flu on steroids. It's a really bad kind of flu. But you
shouldn't be comparing it to a flu because it gives the wrong connotation. Call it COVID-19. You shouldn't compare it to a flu. And perhaps maybe that misunderstanding of what this is the reason that Joe Biden has been still out there telling people this. Let's let this thing go forward. We got to go forward. We can't undermine democracy.
We've never allowed any crisis from the Civil War straight through to the pandemic of 17, all the way around 16. We have never let our democracy take second fiddle. We can both have a democracy and elections and at the same time correct the public health. It's the case where
Where is your rage? Where is your rage? How do you vote for him? Understand what I'm saying here. This man, this sundowning man, is saying, I need an election to take place right now, tomorrow, right now. I need this election to take place. I understand about the pandemic. I understand about the Surgeon General's warning. I understand about all the health professionals freaking out. I understand about the mayors of all of these big cities in Wisconsin. I understand that the governor wants this to be postponed. But Joe Biden, needs this to take place right now. Drag my decrepit ass over the finish line. He does not care about you. This is kind of my point. Why is this okay? And why do you go and vote for somebody who is openly willing for you to get ill and die in order for him to get elected? Why? Why is that okay? Where's your rage? Where's your anger at this? And just to make a point of it, Joe Biden is lying to you even in this moment. After the attacks of 9/11, primaries were rescheduled for September 25th, with runoff, if necessary, September 11th. What do you know? What do you know? The Democratic order didn't fall off of its axis. 15 states have postponed their primaries because of the coronavirus. Here's the list. Alaska, Connecticut, Delaware, Georgia, Hawaii, Indiana, Kentucky, Louisiana, Maryland, New York, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, West Virginia, Wyoming, Puerto Rico. The Democratic order did not fall off of its axis. The date, like much of what we organize ourselves around, is utterly and entirely contrived. Doesn't mean a thing. They can move it to tomorrow. They could have moved it to the day before. They can move it to 2 months. Wouldn't affect one thing. It would affect something politically, though, which is the point. This is why Republicans, and this is why Joe Biden wants it. Politically, if you push this 2 months, you have more people that are able to vote, and some of those people will be voting in areas that may not necessarily be favorable to Republican interests. So Republicans need to get this wrapped up right now and today. As for Joe Biden could put his foot in his mouth tomorrow. The way that he has been handling this particular pandemic is utterly and entirely embarrassing. And maybe the public, when people start dying in mass, starts to pay attention to the fact that one guy can't get a coherent sentence out, one guy can't stand by himself and actually have an interview, can barely have conversations with the news people, can't speak off the top of his head extemporaneously, can't give a decent live stream. When people, the public, perhaps maybe sees that and says, oh my God, and recoil from that, and in the future states that are coming up, especially if they postpone these states, he could collapse. The last thing that he wants to do is allow that potential opportunity. It doesn't matter that Bernie Sanders' path is narrow. The fact that the path exists at all is somewhat of a threat to Joe Biden. He needs to get these states wrapped up. And if you postpone these states, you create a potential for him to not get those states later on if the public perception changes. That's what all of this is about. Wrap this shit up. I don't care about the public. I don't care about these people dying. Wrap this shit up. This is what the lines were like in Wisconsin. Let's take a look at some of these. Look at all of the social distancing that's taking place. Oh, look at the social distancing. This is what Joe Biden and the Republican legislature wanted, purely for political reasons. You think this is safe? Look at these social distancing. Oh, totally safe. I can't imagine what you're going to see when if you get inside. Got another one. Some people have on masks. Most people don't. They're trying to stand, a little bit apart. But the moment that you get inside, of course, that's going to be to some degree degraded. This is sad. Where is your rage? Where is your rage? This did not have to take place. It just didn't. This is enforced. And again, I know I keep repeating this, but I guess to me this is mind-blowing. What takes place in a rational society? Ask yourself that. What takes place in this moment in a rational society? Assume for the moment that you existed in a society where your leaders, at the very least, cared to some degree about you. And when things get bad, that their political instincts would at the very least divulge from themselves and start thinking about, okay, we need to deal with public interests. We're at somewhat of a bad situation that we need to deal with. What's in the best interest of the public? But that's not what happens. Even in the middle of a pandemic where tens of thousands, upwards of 500,000, if not more, would die, they are still looking for their political instincts. And Joe Biden, who runs around screaming about the black people love me. The reality of this is, look at this. Right here. Not everybody is faring the same in regards to the COVID-19 virus. Why? Because the people who tend to die from the virus, elderly, yes, but those with some kind of initial defect, like high blood, something that many people in the African American community ends up having. And because of that, you're having a large disparity of African Americans die in comparison to other demographics because of that particular defect. Ill health, issues of poverty, those things have consequences. Those things are societal to some degree. In Chicago, 70% of COVID-19 deaths are black. Why? Again, deficiencies in health brought up effectively by societal ills. My point is, Joe Biden, who runs around telling everybody that he was a part of the civil rights movement, that he got arrested trying to see Mandela, that Mandela pat him on the back and thanked him. Oh, thank you, Joe. I appreciate your efforts in trying to see me. None of that was true. None of that was true. Going from one black church after the next, lying into one black face after the next. Shameless motherfucker. And in this particular case, the people who are most affected by it are African Americans. Those are the people in Wisconsin who are probably going to go and risk their life to vote for a flagrant, sundowning, nearly senile, cognitively incompetent liar, and risk their life for it. And Joe Biden, knowing that those people are risking their life, and knowing that they are that much more susceptible to dying by this is not my conjecture. This is a flat fact. This is what we know at this point. Joe Biden still says, yes, I need that election to take place today. My secondary point here is, where is your rage? Where is the public rage? Where is the public anger over this? What does a rational society do in this situation? Does a rational society where the legislature, where the government, in some degree, in some iota, cares about the population, does this take place in a rational society? And if this is indeed not a rational society, should the public be okay with that? Meaning, should the public be okay that this legislature, this Supreme Court, was perfectly willing to put on an election today, knowing that it will become that much more of an impetus for this virus to propagate, only for political reasons? Why are you okay with that? They're putting your lives on the line for their political advancement. Why is the public okay? Why does the public accept that? Why aren't you angry at that? Why does that not piss you off? Why does it not dig into you? These are your loved ones. And your loved ones, may not have gone to vote, but you understand that at some point your loved one is going out the house. And one of these people who were propagating around each other may have come in contact with this particular illness at this particular location, and may just be at that convenience store, at that shop, at that nursery, at that hospital that your loved one ends up in. I guess I'm making a point that they are putting your lives on the line entirely for their political reasons. That should be infuriating to you. Why does Joe Biden get a pass on being willing to do that? Why does the Supreme Court, of course the Supreme Court, but why does the Republican legislature and those Republican legislature people get a pass on doing that? That is utterly and entirely outrageous. This was a disastrous ruling by the Supreme Court of Wisconsin, and the public should be apoplectic over this. But again, nothing will probably take place. And all things being equal, this election is entirely and completely illegitimate with the number of suppression that has taken place in this particular race. The Republican Party, by the way, just to put a fine bow on it, what they wanted in this has to do with the Supreme Court seat. This is Vox. I'll just read it. The background is Republicans hope to hold onto a seat on the state Supreme Court, which is up for grabs on Tuesday's election. As a law professor and election law expert Rick Hansen recently noted, only 38% of the voters who requested an absentee ballot in heavily Democratic Milwaukee County have returned one, compared to over 56% of absentee voters in nearby Republicans-leaning Waukesha County. So there's at least some evidence that if additional voters are unable to return their ballots, Republicans will be overrepresented in the ballots and counted. This is why I say Joe Biden is a goddamn idiot in this process. The Republican Supreme Court will get, to some degree, the ability to shape what the election is like coming up in the Democratic primary as it comes around in November, by allowing the Republican legislature to effectively take this, at this particular moment, Joe Biden may have hurt his chances in the election coming up because Wisconsin, supposedly a swing state, will be up for grabs. What Joe Biden should have did if he was confident in himself is push the election, giving Democrats a better chance of actually getting these voters to the polls in order to blunt the number of absentee ballots of the Republicans so they can't take that Supreme Court seat. You see what happened? 4-2 right now in regards to the seat, in which case the Republicans are trying to get one more seat. Joe Biden, for his own political aspirations, because he has no confidence in his ability to effectively keep this charade up, basically has allowed the Republicans to snatch a Supreme Court seat, hurting his chances in the next election, or in a general election, if he indeed makes it out into the general election. I mean, I want to say I have no words, but I've already given a lot of words. So I'll end this here. Arlene Chambers. I had to stand in line today, Jamarl, to just drop off my absentee ballot, deadline 1 p.m., wore my mask and gloves, had to keep 12 feet behind the guy ahead who was nothing on. Arlene from Milwaukee. Wow. Oh, he had nothing on. I see. Arlene, you shouldn't have had to do that. Honestly, you should not have had to do that. This is kind of my point about the whole rational actors thing. If you had a rational government would have never had this voting thing today. A government that at the very least tangentially cared about you and your interests and your life and your livelihood would not have had this today. And yet, here we are. So how do you reconcile a rational government's actions versus our current government's actions? And if indeed I am right, and they put lives on the line entirely for their own political expedience, Joe Biden and the Republican legislature and the Republican Supreme Court, why should there not be anger towards those particular institutions that were perfectly willing to do that? This is outrageous that they're having this election today. This is kind of my point about being apoplectic. Not to mention the reasoning that these low-down, unempathetic, politically craven hacks, outright hacks, willing to put all of these people's lives on the line for their political aspirations. Yes, there should be rage over that. Cool Blue 71, Jamarl, Wisconsin was a tipping point state in 2016. Yes, it was. Republicans pick up for Trump. Yes, it was. His 27th electoral vote, 270 electoral vote, will vote for the winner again in 2020. Yes. Yes. Absolutely. Like, share, subscribe.